month training, which feels like a few weeks ago already, but we did the Hotjar training on like part 1, which was mainly around the basic implementation setup, going over the basics around heat maps and how to use them and how not to use them, how to even share them with stakeholders, and just also looking at permissions and how to find the tracking code for your site. So today we're going to go over a little bit more detail around the recording and some of the other features that Hotjar has. And really the recordings is probably the nuts and bolts of how we use this tool. So looking at a recording, you could honestly spend an entire week just looking through thousands of different recordings and maybe take away absolutely nothing from those recordings. So it's really important to understand how to best utilize this tool and how to make the most of your time. So there's a few different ways that we'll go through, but to kind of start off, inside of your Hotjar account, you'll see the recordings option over here, and how to implement the recordings. Very simple, just like the heat map. You click record visitors. You choose how many recordings that you would like to start, and this is really dependent on the account that you have. I think ours is just the business account. They also have a pro account, which I think gives you 10,000. I know the heat map, you provided other options. And then depending on if you just want a specific page or if you're wanting multiple pages. So for ASU Online, we're just going to say we want to see all pages across the site because we're going to use Google Analytics to find a specific event across the site. So if we only do it on one page, that will limit us to understanding the experience across its entirety. So in this case, we're going to say visit any page. Recording options, I typically leave these two blank. The reason is it depends on how you're analyzing the data. So if you're only wanting to look at, students or users who interact with the page in a certain way, then you'll probably want to click this here. But typically, I even want to see someone who doesn't interact with the page because in some analysis, we might be just wanting to look at overall behavior and trends and themes of students. And so let's say you just launched a new page and you click this, you might notice in Google Analytics that you have a 90% bounce rate, but you're not seeing that within the recordings because you chose to exclude recordings that don't have any click or scroll behavior. So typically I like to leave that on there. And then only 30 plus second sessions. There is a lot of sessions that are under 30 seconds. So I also don't click this. But if you're looking at a very specific action, like for example, today we're going to look at those that submitted a form on the website. I would want to click it because they're not going to be able to submit a form in less than 30 seconds. So after that, we click start recording and it would begin. So in last week's training with Jonathan Carroll, he went over the implementation of Google Analytics. So if you missed that meeting, feel free to reach out to him to get that recording. But we'll kind of go over post-implementation. So what does that look like once it's completed, and then how do you use it? It will take about 15 minutes for just the recordings to even begin. So if I refresh this, it'll still say 0 out of 5,000 recordings. It just takes a little bit of time to process. Additionally, if you do want to stop recordings or edit the settings, you can do that at any time. There are some things that if you change, it will stop the recording. So just be cautious as you're looking through this, what you are changing, and how that will impact the data that you're collecting. So with that being said, you'll notice here, we did a group of recordings back on February 19th. This is how they will come in. And you'll see, once again, I think we went over this in the last training, some of the data that is presented to you. And you'll even see the duration. So you'll even notice here, there's 2 sessions that these will not show in my new recording because I excluded sessions under 30 seconds. So you'll also be able to see how many pages that they visited, in addition to the date and time and how many actions. So let's look at this one. So you'll notice 45 actions, 11 pages. Let's see what kind of data this provides us. The other information that's nice to have is it tells you how they entered your site. So that referral URL. So they came in from Google, which means that they were most likely an organic user. You'll be able to see if it was a marketing campaign. You'll be able to kind of see the UTMs. If there is a UTM, it would be provided at the bottom with the URL. So if you're in marketing and you're looking at behavior around a certain campaign, you can dig deeper by reviewing the UTM on the URL to see how they entered your site. In addition to that, you'll easily tell if they're on a desktop versus a mobile. Mobile, the screen will show a mobile view. And then also what's nice is knowing not only that they were on Chrome, but what version and what operating system. And this is really interesting. We'll go over this in a minute when we get to the feedback polls of how this has really come in handy for some usability issues that we've seen across our site that we've worked with our QA team on. Also, Hotjar user ID. This is the ID that is being imported into Google Analytics if you do create that integration. So this is where that lives if you were curious. If you also click on the actions, so you have a session info and then you have actions. These are all the actions that a user took during this one session or recording. You'll notice though, they don't make a lot of sense necessarily. So for example, you'll see here, they clicked type degree hero, type interest hero, which is probably this here. So if I click on that, it will show me, so it'll take me to that exact action so I can look at it. They don't always make the most sense, and the reason is it's the way that your site is developed. This is where Google Tag Manager comes in handy because you can really leverage the nomenclature of your tags effectively to be able to understand where people are clicking, what section, what click text. So this is a really great start if you're not using Google Tag Manager, which I recognize a lot of people aren't. So this is at least helpful in terms of understanding a little bit of click behavior. So you'll see, like this one's an example, like ACS Focus First. I would have no idea what that was. But if you click to it, it will fast forward to that action. In addition to that, you can take notes. We don't take many notes within our experience. We actually use Airtable. I'll show you an example of what that looks like. So for example, let me go to, we might start seeing certain trends that are happening across the site. Like, okay, we're seeing students searching programs in a certain way, or that they're really interested in careers or looking at the tuition links. So we'll start putting in certain themes that we're seeing across the site. And to be honest, the way that we used to do it, or should I say that I used to do it before Madison, is that I would literally document every single recording. So I would say, okay, this is what this person did, or these are the actions they took, and then how many users are also doing that action. And that ended up taking up like 3 times the amount of time, where if we just spent time actually analyzing and just, you know, documenting on the side, okay, we're seeing this happen a lot, that ended up being more efficient for us versus we're having to document every single recording you saw. So we ended up starting with this type of documentation. And then we slowly kind of moved over to finding high-level trends and then being able to post notes and recordings. So that way we can say, okay, we're seeing that, you know, we can estimate like 25% of recordings over the, you know, 100 that we reviewed, 25% of them were doing this certain action. And then what's nice is you can link that recording so that if you're showing a stakeholder or a product owner or leadership or the design or content team or whoever you're working with, they can actually see that example of that behavior. So in this example, it's showing that a user comes to this page and they just scroll very quickly without reading any piece of content. And you'll see they stopped there, they skimmed for a second, and they just kept going, and then they ended up exiting. They didn't engage, they didn't spend time reading. So we were able to show whoever we're showing this data to, this is the behavior that we're seeing in the majority of the recordings that we're watching. So I think you have to really find your own groove of how you want to document recordings. I've worked with a lot of different people and try to do research on like how does each group do this, and everyone has their own approach. And I think it's really dependent on just how many resources you have, how much time you're spending, and really what you're trying to get out of these recordings. But just to show you Airtable, we also use Airtable in other ways, where once you have the Hotjar ID and Google Analytics attached to each other, I'm starting to put in, okay, this ID, which now I can go in, I can click this, I can go back to Hotjar, look at all their sessions. I can say, okay, this student has only accessed the course from their phone and they're not even reading the questions on the quiz. So this is course behavior. They're going into a course, they're on a phone, they're just trying to answer the easy questions, and then they're leaving. And it's interesting because they're doing it on a mobile device. And so I'm able to say that this is kind of a one-off, this is happening a lot, this was an odd behavior, are we even thinking about mobile responsiveness in our designs? And so from there, I was able to create a table that said, okay, was this desktop, was it not? Did they pass the quiz, did they fail the quiz? And then I'm able to attach that behavior with their action. So once again, just another example. In addition to that, you also have tags. So you can tag a session at any time. We haven't leveraged this, but it is very helpful, and I do know a lot of groups that do leverage this, where, okay, we know that this recording has the RFI submit event attached to it. So we're able to add tags and then go and filter all the recordings by that tag if you choose to later. The reason we don't really do this anymore is because now that we have Google Analytics integrated with Hotjar, we can just use Google Analytics to say, okay, show me someone who did this certain action, and it will filter most of those recordings by that action. So this is helpful if you have students and they're analyzing all this data and you need to go back and just look for something specific. They're able to, at least while they're reviewing the recordings, put something in there that is actionable that you can always easily filter through later. So that's really it for this component. As you look down here, you'll notice there's a lot of different, I guess, marks between a dot and a line, and then there's a gap. And so as you can see, if I highlight over, it actually tells you what that line means. So this means someone implemented a page scroll. They scroll down the page a little bit, even if it was just a fraction. And you'll see if there's a lot of these lines, it means that there was a lot of page scrolling. So, they scrolled a little bit and then a little bit more, and it was progressive. Then you'll notice that these dots are a mouse click. Some of them say mouse click, and then some of them say visit a new page. So depending on where they click, they may click on to the navigation and they may visit somewhere else. So this is kind of helpful. You'll also see in other recordings, you might have these longer lines, and this means that they changed a field. And so you'll just notice that there's different markings to help you understand where the actions occurred. And then if you do click skip pauses, it will skip over all of these gaps. I think I brought this up in the last training. The only issue with skipping pauses is you don't get to see their natural behavior. So for example, if I let this recording run, you'll see there's, and I can slow it down. So this is their natural behavior. It's at the normal speed. and if I'm skipping pauses, it's going to look like it's really fast because they might be spending time actually reading content or trying to understand the information that's being presented to them. So we're skipping past essentially like their thought process of them kind of pausing for a moment. So this is obviously beneficial if you're just looking at high level engagement. But if you're looking at, let's say, a single page and you want to understand, is the content on that page impactful? Are they actually reading it? What are they spending time on the screen doing? You might miss a lot of opportunities to fully understand their natural behavior and their pauses. And so, for example, right here, you'll see like it looks like they're going really fast, but if I turn the skip pauses off, you'll notice that now they're stopped on this section and they're spending probably about 15 seconds now reading the requirements, where if I skip the pause, I may say, oh, they just skimmed the admissions content. They didn't actually spend time reading it, they just skimmed it really quick. So I'm not sure how valid all of this content is. So once again, just keep in mind that skip pauses is nice, especially if it's like a 45-minute recording, which most of them are not, but you do have to be cautious of, once again, your intent of looking at the recording and what you're trying to get out of it. This is a 12-minute recording. Typically, they are a little bit shorter. It's also interesting, like sessions will be broken out into different recordings. So they may be on your page for 10 minutes, but you might have 2 5-minute sessions and without them ever even leaving the page. So there's still a little bit of some hiccups in Hotjar that even I'm trying to fully understand, but you have to also just remember that people who have pop-up blockers, they obviously will not see, you will not receive their recording. And for anybody who joined us last week for Jonathan's recording, we also just have, because the integration between Google Analytics and Hotjar is so new, we're also trying to understand why some people may receive the tracking of Hotjar and why some didn't. For example, like Jonathan's laptop, for some reason, the Hotjar ID was not populating, so his recording was not coming through. So we're just still trying to fully flesh that out and understand this integration and kind of figure out if it's a Hotjar issue and it's the load speed, if it's the person's browser, and what would be causing some and not all to show. Once again, this is a very large pause. I would also just hesitate that just because they pause doesn't actually mean they're reading. A lot of the times, these really long pauses means that they got distracted. They went to a different tab. You cannot see if they went to another tab. But if you're seeing a pause for like over 2 minutes and no scrolling, and there's not a lot of content on that page, it typically means that they're idle. They're off doing something else. So just use your judgment too. Understand how long it would take you to read something, and if they're taking 4 to 5 times as long to read that, then you can't make the assumption that they are that invested into what they're seeing. And this is just normal. This is normal. Like out of the 12 minutes this person's here, they only may be engaged for like 2 minutes. So this is just kind of how it is, which skip pauses can be very nice for that reason. Oh, sorry. And then Christian, we whitelisted RIP to not record. Yes, so we did do this with Hotjar where we whitelisted our IP address at ASU so that it wouldn't record our own sessions. This is something in Hotjar that you can set up. However, there's been, I know, some changes in Hotjar where now, like, for example, what used to happen is I wouldn't see this if I was on the ASU network because this is a part of the Hotjar implementation. All of a sudden in the last few months, this came back on our IP address. So there's definitely been some updates to Hotjar that has, I think, broken some of their features. But there used to be at least a way where you could whitelist your own IP address. And the reason we would do that is to make sure that we're not recording like our employees maybe accessing the site. But Jonathan made a great point last week, and he said, well, we have a lot of students that access our site on our network. So you just have to figure out from a business standpoint what's best for your unit. Thanks for calling that out, Christian. Okay, in addition to that, I'm now gonna kind of transition over to the Google Analytics integration. So we brought up this dashboard last week. Forgive me, it's not been designed, but we kind of created it for a proof of concept to make sure that the implementation was working. And so this looks like a lot of data, but I'm going to kind of go over with you what exactly is on here and why we have this data showing. So essentially what happened is we had implemented, or we've merged now these two data sets together. So ASU Online, we see about 300,000 users a month. So it's thousands of users a day. So that means if I put on a recording for 5,000 users, it will end that day. So we don't have time to look through 5,000 recordings. So we're really specific about what is the objective that we're trying to learn. So in this situation, we want to know out of people who go to ASU Online and go to any of our pages, doesn't matter what page it is, and they submit this form, what is their behavior? What is their behavior before? What is their behavior after? And what is their behavior with the form? The reason is like since we've added GDPR to our RFI forms, we've seen a decrease in people submitting the form. So this can go in two ways, right? One, we're only looking at people who submit a form. So we're not looking, we don't have the time to look at everyone on the site, but there might be people who actually click on the form, look at it, and then decide, oh wait, I don't want to do this because of the design or the way we're displaying content or for whatever reason. So in that situation, we could always say, okay, for anyone who clicks continue on the form, let's look at those users. But in this scenario, all we're saying is anyone who actually submits the form, what is their behavior? So the way that our analytics team has our event set up, I'm easily able to filter this data to say anyone who did this event action, show me their Hotjar user ID. And then also we added in the date. So to make sure, what we were seeing is that because we have so many recordings, I'd have a hard time finding an ID that actually was in Hotjar because that recording only happened for a short period of time. So if I'm looking at past that date or before that date or after the time that it stopped or before the time it stopped, they're not going to be, obviously I wasn't recording, so I'm not going to be able to find that data. So for example, I found an ID using that dashboard, and this is the ID here. So let me show you. Let me go back a step. So I said, okay, here's the ID. I copied it here, brought it over here, and I said, okay, show me this ID. 8558. There we go. And apply. Okay. So based on Google Analytics is telling me that this person submitted an RFI. So as I now look at the recording, I should see somewhere in here their experience with that form. So this person came to a degree page, they kind of skimmed some of the content, they're looking at the cost, and even in this pause, you can see that they're using their keyboard to move this. So it's interesting that it didn't even show that there was an action here. So if I would have skipped pause, I would have missed that. Then they're like, okay, done with the cost calculator. I'm going to continue to read about the program. They're going to scroll a little bit and scrolling down. Okay, they're not really reading, they're skimming a little bit. And then there's a long pause. So knowing that, and you can even see this person's behavior, they went up. So my guess is they probably went to they were reading and then now they're like 2 minutes on pause here. They kind of left, they're doing something. I'm gonna skip that. And now they came back and they're filling out the form. So now I can kind of look at exactly what they're doing. I can see, did they stop? Did they hesitate? It looks like they're kind of moving through. Everything looks normal. They click submit. And then now what's so nice is I can even see what happened after. And so anyways, what I started to, when I started doing this analysis, I started to notice an interesting behavior happening where a student would submit a form, and then so they would start on a degree page, they would submit a form, and then they would use the thank you page to go back to the same degree page, and then they'd read a little bit more content, and then they would start continuing to move through more and more degrees. So I think students have that intention that they are going to receive something from this form. So instead of reading all the content on the page, they're submitting a form hoping they're going to get something, maybe that summarizes it, a PDF, they'll get additional information. They're not getting that information. They're just getting, hey, we'll contact you. And then they're navigating back to the page they just came from. So it's this weird circle that's happening. That's obviously something we need to look into. But it's interesting because I wouldn't have known this unless we started looking through, recordings to understand that behavior. And our intention was to understand GDPR, but even though that was our intention, that's not the data that we were finding. So just have understanding too that sometimes you'll kind of get lost in finding a certain thing that's happening on your site and you'll end up finding something else, and that's very normal. And the reason we didn't find anything is because we really wanted to know why students weren't submitting the form. So if I'm only looking at students who are submitting the form, then clearly that's a gap, and we have to figure out another way to understand behavior just around the form without their actual submission. So that's an example of how we're able to kind of pinpoint certain actions. Kind of how Data Studio works and Google Analytics. It's very easy to create a dashboard once it is implemented. So when I mean implemented, that you have Google Analytics and Hotjar, I guess it's easy depending on the way that it's implemented, should I say that. So if you do have questions about implementation, you can always reach out to Jonathan Carroll and his team. But the way Data Studio works is I use Data Studio for everything. I really don't use Google Analytics as much anymore. I mean, granted, the Analytics is taking the data to Data Studio, but I don't spend a lot of time within Google Analytics. I know I come to Data Studio and I build my chart, and then I have a one-stop shop that I can keep coming back to, which is really nice. And you can always create custom reports in GA, but it's just easier if you have a dashboard for a single purpose that you can just keep repurposing. And the reason I say that you can always use a custom report, I'm probably the only person whose GA looks like this, but I have 1,000 custom reports. Like, I just keep creating new ones every time I need something. So for this instance, I would want to create a table, and you'll notice in this interface how easy Data Studio is. So do not be scared by it. It is a very easy visualization tool. You just have to know what data to pull and how to pull it. So I would definitely recommend working with your analytics team if you have one, or just whoever understands your Google Analytics account to make sure you're pulling the data correctly. So in this instance, the way that the custom variable is set up is saying the Hotjar user ID. As soon as I click that, it's going to pull up all of the Hotjar IDs. So this is great, but this doesn't tell me anything. So now I want to know, okay, show me the event action that these Hotjar user IDs took. And one ID might take 100 actions, so you can see that's why also it's going to take a long time to be able to produce that report. But with that being said, sorry, I had it in the wrong place. Here I want to do sessions. So it's now going to tell me what events they took and within that session. And to be honest, it should probably be unique events. Okay. So now I'm able to filter more broadly into certain events that were created in Google Analytics. The other thing that obviously there's a filtering option down here too. So if we want to make sure that we're only looking at a specific host name, so I only want to look at the domain of asuonline.asu.edu. I've created that filter earlier, but I can just reuse it here, save it, and then I know that that data is a little bit more cleaned up, and I'm not looking at anything outside that might be coming to your Google Analytics account. So now that I have this data, the only other thing that I want to add is a date. You can do date, hour, and minute. I had originally just added date, but you'll want to know the hour because your recording might stop. And so it's important to know like when your recording stops, so you're not wasting time trying to find IDs that don't exist. Okay, and then you can just change this to the date and time. There you go. And we'll do a data studio training in April, I believe. So we'll go over this in way more detail, but at least you can kind of understand how this data is being pulled and how this works. In addition to that, then all I did was create a filter. And I just want to filter by the event action and say, okay, now this makes it a lot easier. I want to know anyone who did RFI submit. And you can see there's a ton of different actions. Someone who clicked apply now, the cost calculator. So I can continue to look and review this data. The other thing is I know that that recording happened on a specific date. So let's just change this to February 19th. There we go. And so just to be super transparent, I will show you the issue that we're having right now. I haven't worked with Jonathan yet closely on this, but since we've implemented this, there has been a little bit of an issue where, for example, this ID here, if I go and I take this and I add it into Hotjar, there might be times where it says no recording. So somehow Google Analytics captured an event through Hotjar. They did these things on this date. Either one, my recordings may have stopped before 10:56. Oh, sorry, that's PM. Let me do an AM. That should have been running at this time. Let me try. Okay, like this one. I know that it was running at 8 AM on this day. So the question is like, why isn't this populating in Hotjar? And we are seeing that there are some areas where Hotjar is not recording on all browsers. So just keep that in mind. We'll hopefully have a solution in the next month as we dig a little bit deeper and continue to use this of why does some come up and some don't. And you'll see like even on this one, let's see if we have any luck here. Nope. So we'll hopefully have a solution for you, but I just want to be super transparent that if you do come across this issue, we're seeing it too. And hopefully it's an easy fix, but we'll find out. So unfortunately, there are times where you will have to look through a lot of different Hotjar IDs. ASU Online is an odd website in terms of because we're getting so much traffic. Like I'm telling you, the recording maybe only lasts about a half a day with 5,000 recordings. That you probably won't have that issue. You'll probably have like 100 recordings a day or 200. It really depends on your site. Some of our landing pages, it makes it a lot easier with a lot less users visiting. But in this case, ASU Online does get a lot of traffic. So we're not sure if that's caused. Okay. So that's recordings. There's a lot more that we could go over in terms of recordings, but recordings are a gold mine in my opinion. It just takes a lot of time. And so on our team, we do have 2 UX research students that really help us and spend a lot of time in this data. However, what I'm starting to see is that those that are actually designing the site, if they're not familiar with how people are organically using the design, how they're organically reading the content, like in what order are they digesting the information? You really lose the understanding of the product or page that you designed if you're not actually looking at these recordings from a design standpoint. So we've kind of shifted from not just our researchers doing it, but the designers too. Like anytime we launch a new site, it is now a requirement for that designer to watch at least 100 recordings, and not even for the extent of having to perform or create an analysis around it, but so that they understand some of the natural behavior that is happening on the pages. And they're the experts. They designed it in a certain way. They're kind of the expert on how this page was built with the developer. So it also will help with usability. If they do see any red flags that immediately after launch, we'll see it in the recording. So yeah, I do highly recommend that if you are on a design team, to definitely spend time in here. If you're on a content team, work closely with your design team and ask them to document what they're finding and to provide you some examples so that you can see. But yeah, it's very time intensive. So on that front, we're going to move on. The other features, talking about incoming feedback, polls, and surveys. So the incoming feedback, this, I think I might have brought this up last training, how 4C has their own, Hotjar has their own. It just really depends on your, it really just depends on like what product you want to use, what tool you want to use, and how you're fully using it. So I'm bringing up this specifically because what we started seeing if you look at the results, and this is actually better than what we were seeing. And we were seeing like a 1 or 2 in a lot of instances. And so it was really able for us to look at the quick fixes that we needed to take on the site. So for example, if I just want to look at people who rated us a 1, clearly they're having a really bad experience and we want to understand what's going on. So I started noticing these issues that were popping up on our website. It was happening on like a month-by-month basis. And it was just one user every month. And so we're like, oh, it can't be that big of a deal. It's just one user. But when one user every month, and clearly you can see we don't get a lot of feedback. This is in the last 90 days. This is all that we've gotten, I guess, under the 1. But it's still not a lot. This isn't a lot. But there's something that we need to look into. So if you look at like this one, that's all the same screenshot. What's really nice is this helped us find an issue that we didn't even know existed. So what happened is we started getting this feedback that the website doesn't work. This person put, your website doesn't work. I can't search your program. Why isn't there a list of degrees available on your website? So we were trying to understand what was going on. And you'll notice in all 3 of these screenshots, Safari 10, Safari 9, Safari 10. So I brought this version control up because we were trying to understand why weren't we seeing this issue? Well, we all have, you know, we work for the university, we have new laptops or laptops in the last few years, or what we're required to update our laptops. And so we started noticing that anyone who was on Safari 10 or older was having bugs that were occurring because of the animations on the page. So we were able to use our QA team, use Browser Stack, we were able to find the issue, but without Hotjar, we would have never have known this existed. We might have seen it once in a recording and thought it was a bug. So then what we did is we looked at Google Analytics for like how many users are coming to the site using Safari 10 or older. It was like 5 to 10% of our users last year, which is still a big portion. That's like 20,000+ users. So this feedback tool is almost more important for usability because when people are upset and they are angry, it at least allows them a way to communicate with you if they aren't choosing to email you or use, you know, the contact page. There's also other feedback that's come up, right? And this is just the 1 stars, but where people are saying that it's too hard to find the contact page. Like clearly people don't want to submit a form. They want to just directly contact you. So how are we using this data to A/B test new solutions on the site based on the feedback that we're getting from the users on our site? And tread with caution. It's one person. I totally get that. But if they are taking the time to complain, you also have to take that into perspective of how many people maybe aren't complaining. And this is where A/B testing is really important, if it is a new change to your site, but also just usability and working with your development and QA team to make sure that everything is actually working correctly for the users that are coming to your site. And then in return, you'll see the people that are happy. People that are happy, like they're not leaving actual comments. They're just saying, great, 5-star. And it automatically takes a screenshot of the page they're on. But you'll see there's no comments. So really you're getting the most from typically the 3 stars and beyond. So anyways, there's a lot of great information from this tool. I highly recommend that you do put this on sites, that even if it's just temporary, if it's you launched a new site and you wait a month after launch and then you put it up just to make sure that there's nothing going on. This is what it looks like. It's not too invasive. However, I will also tell you that on mobile, it can be invasive. So on mobile, on ASU Online, we were getting a lot of negative feedback where this is, that we have too many pop-ups. We had the cookie banner pop up. We had this sticky footer. We had a chat. We had a feedback, and it was overlapping with content, and it was a very negative experience. So we chose to not have the feedback on mobile. So there are negatives to it if you have a lot going on your site like we do with ASU Online, but most sites aren't like that. So you should have some way outside of even just 4C for really quick feedback that doesn't, take a survey for someone just to communicate with you. So just wanted to at least provide you of what this looks like. And like I said, they can choose to write something, they don't have to. And even with the 300,000 people that we get to our site on a monthly basis, you'll see in the last 30 days, we had 2 people actually do it. Sorry, that's wrong. We had maybe 12. Still not a lot. So just FYI, and keep in mind again though, you'll see, even though 7, the most is 5, you will see it a lot go negative. So we don't really use this as our NPS by any means. 4C is a much better algorithm for Net Promoter Score, but this is a really great tool if you need to use it. Okay, about 10 more minutes and we're almost through. So polls. Polls is another great tool to get a little bit more granular information. I'll show you a few examples of how we've used it. It's kind of a bummer, this was a few years ago. It won't actually show me the pie chart, but this was probably one of my favorite ones we did. We put up on ASU Online a poll. Let me see if it shows what it looks like, appearance. Okay, so it kind of looks like this, where it asks a question. So it says, I am a future. And then we had all these different options for students to choose from. So this was 3 years ago. What we were trying to understand was who's coming to our site, because we couldn't see that in Google Analytics. We saw that a little bit in 4C, but we wanted to really understand what buckets of content did we need to create for students or parents or users of any kind that didn't already exist on our site. So we put this up for a week and saw about 3,000 responses. So this definitely got a lot more interaction than the incoming feedback. One, I would say I assumed that they thought that they were going to get information based on what they put. So it wasn't very clear that we were doing this for research purposes. So they're probably like, oh, okay, great. I'm going to use this as a personalization tool. And then based on what I put, I'll get, some sort of dynamic content. So I assume that's why we had so much input in this. Probably not the best way to use it, but it was nice because we got a lot of great data and we got it really fast. So we were able to turn it off within the week. So what came out of this poll is we had another category. We were seeing in the data that we were having a lot of students who were considering themselves non-degree. And so we weren't speaking to non-degree students anywhere on our site. This was just something that we hadn't, really thought about. We had our continuing professional education, but then what we started to realize is, okay, what we did is we added non-degree and we just sent them to continuing professional education. Then we started getting more feedback from students through other means that they were also non-degree seeking students. So then instead of just sending them to continuing professional education and then them bouncing, we started realizing that we needed to create a page of content so that we could explain the difference between non-degree courses and continuing professional education and allowing them to click to where they were best fitted for. So through this experience, it was very little data that we were collecting, but it was so impactful in terms of how do we continue to build this site for the right audience. We also started finding that transfer student was like very heavy in terms of those that were coming to the site. And we also could see this through Google Analytics that the transfer page was like one of the most visited pages. But we were then also able to build out more content. Like we put more effort into the transfer page to make sure that it did have enough information for those that maybe were visiting the transfer site. So once again, this data was really impactful. The other category, we didn't know what was going to start coming up. Students or users were just telling us. And then we also were able to build out more robust content for all of these audiences. You'll see all these audiences now exist on our site. So this was just an example of a poll. Another example of a poll that we did was for Uber. We had asked them why they weren't like why were they abandoning? Why were they not moving forward and signing up? The reason I say that is because it's similar to Starbucks. It's free education if you're eligible. Like, what is causing you to not move forward? This is another really interesting one. So you can see, I don't have access. They wanted to take different degrees than what was offered. They kept getting messages that they weren't eligible, but they were. And it's interesting, I started seeing a lot of these messages where I am eligible, but it's telling me I'm not. So we also started finding usability issues where people were using the wrong login. They were using, for Uber, they have a driver login and they have a rider login. So anyone who rides with Uber, we all have a login for that. But there was no error message letting them know that maybe they had logged in with the wrong email account. So they were getting really frustrated. So anyways, there was a lot of different data that we were picking up from this, but it was really fascinating to understand. This, as you can see, was only 28 responses. And I think we had this up for a month. So this shows too that like the way you ask the question, what you're trying to get out of them, if it's multiple choice versus a written question, you'll see different results based on that. But if you're trying to understand the why behind something, these are always really great tools. Just make sure that it's not impacting your KPIs for that page. Make sure it's not causing people to not continue with filling out a form. Make sure it's not impacting the experience in a negative way. And so my suggestion is when you launch these, there is a way right here to say that you only want to launch it for, like 30% of the people that come to your page. You can just kind of do a small test, one, to make sure that the way that people are answering the questions makes sense so that you don't have to rephrase the question, but two, that you're not seeing like a dip in conversion or a dip in, or an increase in your bounce rate. So what's really nice is you do have the ability to really customize this. You can create your own question. You can create the colors, I think mainly the appearance is only colors. You can see here, like if it's on the left of the page, the right of the page, the positioning, if it's dark mode versus light mode. And you can target, you could say just desktop users. You can just target a certain page. It doesn't have to go on all your pages. You can target users. And you can also say when users about to abandon the page. So we did this where they actually move their mouse to leave the page, this poll comes up. So there's other ways to implement this that isn't just shown for everyone. You could be strategic about it. So that's just another example. And then surveys, we actually haven't done, if I recall, we don't do really surveys. The reason is because there's a 4C survey. So we don't want there to be too much friction. And 4C has a lot of power behind that tool. That's really where, if you have survey questions, like 4C should really cover the experience. But if you're looking at just figuring out questions to ask the people that are coming to your page, you probably should find a different solution than on the website, just because Scoresy and the cookie pop-up, and if you have feedback tools, there's just a lot. You just really need to be cautious of how much we're asking our students to provide us feedback. So just keep that in mind. There is obviously an option here. I'm not going to go through it, but if you want to look into it, you're more than welcome. And then other polls, I think you can see some of these I've kind of tested out, but what's nice about the polls too is you can also, let's see, it also will give you like charts. So you don't have to look through all the data. You can export it into a spreadsheet, but it'll give you charts to show you, like for example, on this one, you would see like what was the top users based on what their input was. So there's a lot of other great features that Hotjar has. But anyways, this is really it. We're to the point we're not really using funnels. I've tried to use it. It's really based on like page views. And so if you're like, okay, I want to see the funnel of people that visit a certain degree and then go to the thank you page, you can use that for this. We just don't have that need, particularly because we use Google Analytics for that. And we're not using forms either, but they do have a lot of other features that is exciting to use if you choose to. So anyways, I know we have 2 minutes left. This will be the last recording or training for Hotjar. So if there are any questions, feel free to ask them now or provide them in the chat. Otherwise, you can always reach out to me directly and I'm happy to answer.